Oh, I say, sorry, I've left you hanging there, haven't I? This is Carl Munson with the Good Evening Portugal live stream, part of the Good Morning Portugal franchise project. We live stream, we have a YouTube channel, and we podcast as well. And Tuesday is Good Evening Portugal's News Hour, where we look at a particular issue and talk about it, hopefully with you, and of course with new star of the show, Jacqueline Mary Brown, Dona Jacqueline, to us here in this community, who made a stunning debut last week and picked up quite a few fans, I think, Jacqueline. So how's your week been since? Lots of autograph pictures being sent out around the country and the world? I've
had a few people contact me, actually, people that listened to the broadcast who sort of found me on my family Facebook page. Sorry, I was going to start thinking, how did they find me? But that's how they found me.
Yeah, well, you struck a chord, I think, with people last week.
Oh, that's really nice.
And I suspect you will again this week. Last week, of course, we looked at paranormal Portugal and the human fascination with such things. And then we talked to you, didn't we, about your, well, I think we bestowed upon you the expat elder status. And then you picked up the name Dona Jacqueline as a grandmother to a few people, I think, who recognized that in you, that you had a certain sort of energy and insight, and just wanted to be friends with you as a result. So you're back again this week to bring that same perspective, perhaps, on what we're discussing this week. And I need to just have a quick sip of water, too, excuse me. It's not what you think, everybody. I may well be gargling with garlic and all sorts soon, because I think that's going to come into our discussion. What we're doing tonight is the big picture around COVID. And I wrote what I thought was some quite nice notes for this show, which I don't think I can find now. But basically, the gist of it was, is that generally speaking, the COVID-19 pandemic seems to be dealt with on a physical and mental level, doesn't it? And certainly, you know, physically, the medical side of it, and around mental health and well-being, there is some attention to that, I think, and certainly more so as people have begun to understand what a shock it's been and a trauma for humanity. But what strikes me, and where I think you will come into this, Jacqueline, is how if we're going to take a truly holistic view of anything, including the pandemic, we might bring into this the spiritual realm. And you know, furthermore, what staggers me is that there is no reference or regard for the spiritual in our treatment of the pandemic. And I wondered why that was. And I think what I came up with it was initially the fact that it's, you know, people make this kind of awkward and uncomfortable response, don't they, to spirituality? It's like, well, that's a personal thing, so we don't talk about that publicly or on the news or anything like that. But it seems almost entirely absent from public life, the spiritual aspect, whatever you take that to mean, when it comes to the pandemic. What do you think about
that? I do think that people tend to be a bit embarrassed by the spiritual, but not by what they call the paranormal, which in a way, we're talking about supernatural, and I mean, God is a supernatural being, and so I think we mentioned when we're talking about the paranormal that that's what people are looking for. They're looking for a power greater than themselves that they can maybe apply to life. And that is because of the way we're built. I mean, that's built into us. It's actually part of our natural life. And, you know, even in talking about COVID, I actually want to talk quite a lot about the mental aspect of it.
Okay.
For the same reason, because the spiritual aspect comes in to the mind. And when we were first created, we were really supposed to be governed by our spirit. But our ancestors rather blew the picture. And that's no longer the case unless we actually do reconnect.
Okay.
So, but the biggest stress that is caused is we have to learn to get control how our mind reacts to things.
Interesting. Okay.
And there's only really one way to do that. And I want to come on to that in a minute, but I want to explain something first, if I may.
Of course.
And that is that I've got a collection of fridge magnets.
That's right.
You may wonder what on earth that's got to do with anything, but one of them is a picture of a lion with a great big mane on his top of his head, really unruly and rather matted. And the caption on this fridge magnet is that we have the hair on our head to prove to us that we can't control everything. And that's a great reminder to me, because we want, as human beings, to be able to control things. Things that we can't control. And quite a lot of what's going on in the pandemic is out of our control, or it's in the hands of governments, or we can feel very out of control. But we can control what goes on in us.
Yes.
And that's really where the spiritual comes in, because our mind needs to control what we think. So actually there's a sequence that goes on. First of all, you have thoughts, and then your emotions follow those thoughts, and your actions follow your emotions usually. So we're going to be governed, if you like, by our thoughts. And what I know that you can do is that you can control what you think. And our minds and our brains are actually separate. But our minds can tell our brain what to think. And most of the sort of like do-it-yourself self-help courses, actually, they recognize this and they start with the mind. But they have a missing link. And so there's a lot of talk about changing your mind. And but there's not thoughts about what to change it from to.
Okay, yeah.
So there's people do meditation for relaxation, where they try to empty their minds, which is almost impossible.
Indeed.
But it's also quite dangerous, because any old thing can enter your mind if you empty it. So the best way of getting your mind right is to fill it with the right things.
Okay. Well, I could create a different sort of focus in life.
Yeah, it creates a different focus, but it is actually very important what you think, going back to that progression that I've just talked about. So if you can get your mind under your control, because you can do that, there's lots of things we can't control, but we actually can control what goes on in our heads.
Marvelous. Okay. And are you going to demonstrate or share some tips on how that might occur tonight?
Well, I can share some tips, but I will bring scripture to things, because that's what I do. And where I go, Jesus goes too, and he's often called the Word of God. And the Bible to me is like him stepping off the pages and talking to me in person. And so all these new things that talk about mind control and changing your mind, they often use mantras and various things like that to try to say the opposite of what they're actually feeling. And that might work to a certain extent, but it doesn't actually work for very long. And our body, which we'll come on to in a minute, actually knows when it's being told the truth or not. But God actually said it all first in his word. So 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul wrote, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, which is getting hold of what goes on in your head. And God expects us to find out what he thinks about us and join in with thinking the same. And a lot of the Bible is God telling us things that he wants to do for us.
Great. Okay, excellent. We have a few people that are tuned in. I know that for sure. And we have a couple of hellos as well. Will you permit me to, as advertised, look at the big picture of COVID at the moment?
Yes.
Because I think it's quite a useful context for the global picture and the Portuguese picture as well, because obviously that's what we are. Good morning, Portugal. Good evening, Portugal. Before I do that, let's just, we have boa noite to all from Carl and Dona Jacqueline. Johnny was here from Belgium with us last week, and I think you had a resemblance to somebody in her family. I can't quite remember who it was, but a friend you made last week. I don't know if you're doing confessions, but we've got Douglas saying he's abnormal. I'm not sure we can extend to confessions tonight, Douglas, but we'll see what we can do for you. And he's responding to your empty mind. I used to tell my dad that the booze had gone to my head. He said, it will be mighty lonely. Empty mind, you see. Yeah, we got it, Douglas. We got it. Ty says, not for me. Enjoy your evening. He's probably already gone. And this is, to me, this is so fascinating. It is the hot button, isn't it, of the G word and the J word, and how you know, some people just cannot even hear it and stick around to talk about it. So fair enough, Ty, your choice. Some people get sick because they cannot control what is happening around them. That's an interesting comment, Johnny. I imagine we'll return to that. Hello, friends, from Shelley. Hi, Shelley. Lovely to have your company. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Mag says, boa noite from Caldash, just down the road from you, Jacqueline, I think there. Caldash, yeah. And boa noite. And thank you for the wonderful share. It's a pleasure, Charles. It's a pleasure. And, you know, I've got to admit, you know, I have my own, not reservations exactly, but I really get how awkward and difficult talking about anything to do with God or Jesus or scripture can be. And that's it, sort of symptomatic and indicative, isn't it, of where we're at with all of this. You know, people very happily talk about and argue about politics and fall out very happily. But then when there's any talk about falling in or unity or peace or love, it's like, that's it, I'm out of here. Very, very interesting. Gary, a new name, Garvo. I am a little dismayed because whatever your views about the virus, it seems we are being shepherded back into social division, physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Absolutely right, Garvo. That's why he is Garvo with an insight like that. Absolutely right. And Mag, oh, we might, another fan. I think she means you, not me. Dona Jacqueline there. So let's go to this big picture around the world now, and it does put into perspective, I think, you know, where we're at the moment, and you know, it is horrible to see this. You know, there are 33,759,000 or so coronavirus cases. I think it's being updated as we speak there, and we've just gone past 1 million deaths, haven't we, globally, that are reported to be connected with COVID. And I have to choose my words carefully here. I obviously have my own opinions and reservations about this whole thing. And then we'll look for Portugal here. And in the world rankings, actually, no, let's find out. Let's just go alphabetically here. We'll go down to Portugal. Scrolling all the way down, this is worldometers.info where I'm getting this information and have done since March or April of this year. Portugal, there we go. We are just under 75,000 cases and just under 2,000 deaths. And each one of those obviously is a tragedy for the families involved, and in no way in any of our discussion here do we wish to take away from that. That's just a horrible, grim reality of life, ironically, and that's the fate of all of us at some point, of course, with this. So that's the global picture and the Portuguese picture there. And then I was trying to find the measures. If you do need to know what's going on in Portugal at any time, I can't think of a better place to go. And I couldn't find what I wanted because their reporting is so comprehensive and as factual as possible. They're far more factual and not as opinionated as I am when I talk about this. Go to safecommunitiesportugal.com for the latest, for the updates and everything to do with how to respond in an English website here, English-speaking service here that will keep you up to date on all the measures and the updates in terms of what's going on with the health and medical picture around the country. So a really good service from safecommunitiesportugal.com. And I think Gary has hit the nail on the head there with this whole concept now of a possible second lockdown. Where we're going with this seems to be being managed. It's like if you let governments decide, they will do. The clue is in the name, isn't it? They will govern you. They will do what they think according to their ethics and principles. And what we seem to be discovering variously around the world is that it's actually a very good mirror of the ethics and morals of political leaders. And we're beginning to see, aren't we, that where people's interests lie as politicians. And I feel quite comfortable in Portugal, I have to say. But then when I look at my home country, I'm really shocked about how it's working in the UK. And it seems that the ethics, if we call them that, of the UK government are being played out. The self-interest, the vested interests of the government there are being played out using the pandemic as a not even as a cover, just as a way of bringing about some of their more personal desires, it would appear. And this is all happening to the absolute disgust and dismay of people. And the really shocking thing about this, there doesn't seem to be much people can do about it, except gather in Trafalgar Square and then be charged by the police, physically or in terms of the law. So we have a pretty grim picture around the world, and that's why I think it's so helpful to talk to you, to have you here tonight, and to bring in, to make the invitation to people to talk about this in a much broader way. What we can do. I think when we talked before, Jacqueline, about this, we were talking, like you were saying before, what it is you can do for yourself and for your loved one, rather than the bigger picture. Which, if I was really going into one there, wasn't it, sort of ranting about the government, but clearly, if you take it from that point of view and look at what the government are doing, you give up your power, don't you? You can make yourself quite unhappy and powerless. Whereas what you're suggesting, I think, is taking more responsibility.
Well, I'm not at all unsympathetic to what's going on, and I'm as appalled as you are about all sorts of things, and I do question a great deal of what we're being asked to do. And I have been doing some sort of investigations into that, and I will continue to do that because I do think there is a lot of deception going on, and or just not necessarily deliberately by individuals in the government, but collectively, it's beginning to look like a big control of population. So yes, we can concentrate on that, but and we can actually organise ourselves probably to speak against it. But I'm talking about not going under in the meantime. We can control what we can control, which is ourselves. And we can, as you said, take back our power. We can be empowered to do different things. And I know when COVID first started, and then I'd been in isolation for a long time because of of disability and various things. And I got myself in a right old state for a little while, because I was thinking, well, now maybe a few more people will understand what it feels like to be totally isolated and on your own, and sometimes very needy and not getting help that you need. And I started to have what I call a pity party about it all, you know, and thinking, well, it would be just nice if somebody rang up and said, well, now I know what you feel like. And then I thought, no, don't do that. And in actual fact, it has worked in the complete opposite for me in my personal life. I mean, it's having the adverse effects that I can't see my family can't travel, and various other things. There's all sorts of things that are going on that could be scary, but I have benefited hugely by taking control of what's happening in my life, starting with the mind.
I'd love to hear more about that. So when was that happening? This is so at the beginning of the pandemic. You kind of went with the the pity party. You described it brilliantly. That was what at the beginning, when when everybody was in a massive state of uncertainty, and in many ways we were very trusting of governments, weren't we, around the world? It's okay, it's the government's job to organise the affairs of a country, and to do it collectively, and depending on your level of democracy, to be trusted to do that, because they are managing the population and the law and the infrastructure and so on. So you would think, well, that's probably quite a good place to start, is at the top, as it were, in that sense. And as that started to filter through, then it was dawning on you as real, as something really quite horrible or difficult.
Yeah, but it also, you see, it depends on how we react to things, and that's the only thing we can control, is how we react to things. And so most growth in life, even if you're talking about growth in our body, our physical growth, comes about by overcoming obstacles. Babies rock about on their bottoms, and eventually they pull themselves up, and they move, and they fall down, and they move, and they fall down. But they make progress by actually just keeping going, really.
Indeed.
So you're choosing. I mean, I made a choice to think which I hadn't probably done in previous isolation. What is it I can do to make my life better in this process and to grow in it? And that's what's happened to me. But that was a decision that I made, and to put my energy and my thoughts into that, and not into it, worrying about what I couldn't have and what was going on, not being scared all the time.
So it was the adversity itself that prompted your change of heart? Yeah. Okay.
And I'll give you an example, actually, of somebody that I know who's a multimillionaire in business, and he's made his money by organising what he calls stages or platforms for people to tell their stories and sell their products, really, I suppose, through that. And, that's what he did. So it was always people and large gatherings. And overnight and over a few days, he started to lose millions. But he's been a great example, because he's pivoted his whole business and put it all onto virtual conferences, which is, this is what we're doing now.
Indeed, yes.
We're communicating virtually to people, and probably talking to a lot more people than you would normally. So there are those sort of things, and that's one of the things that I've done. I've gone online a lot more. I've been to all sorts of meetings online that and couldn't get to before. But that's because everybody else has gone online as well. so it's had a benefit.
Yeah, and what you haven't mentioned there is we found out last week. If I may mention your age again, you're 80 plus, and you decided you had a message from upstairs, as it were, to become an internet marketer or learn about internet marketing, which I thought was so brilliant when you first told me that. And
yes, everybody thinks it's funny, and my family think I'm completely bonkers.
I don't think you're bonkers. I think it's brilliant, but quite unexpected and unusual, isn't it? And I suppose that's why there is the surprise around it. But you do what you're told when you get those sort of orders, is my understanding.
I do, and it wasn't at all easy. And it hasn't been easy, and it's still not easy. But I was listening later, to all the people who are really, really worried about their finances, where they're going to, how they're going to feed their families, how they're going to, pay their bills, how they're going to pay their doctor's bills.
Yeah.
And I recently was visited by a young lady who had just started her singing career, and she was beginning to get known as a fado singer. She's Portuguese, and she was going off to, she was being invited to restaurants and so on and so forth, and COVID comes along and boom, smashed. It all went to pieces. And, but so I did it really, I believe, as God just used me as an example. Or I decided to be an example, whichever way you like to look at it, and say to my family, look, you can do something. If I can do it, anybody can do it. If I can do it at 82 with absolutely, in my really young days, we never had a television, we didn't have mobile telephones, and we didn't have internet. The first time I ever used a computer, I was frightened to death of it. I just thought it was all going to blow up.
Yes.
I'm not far off that now, but
I think a lot of people do think that still, Jacqueline. Didn't your husband have a brilliant observation about computers?
Yes.
I think you shared with me.
He said he could never learn to use something where you had to press the on button to turn it off, or the off button to turn it on.
That's such a smart observation. I love that. Steve says, great guest tonight, Carl. Big fan of Jacqueline. Me too, Steve. Thanks for that. The bigger the population, the more governments feel the need to control. China, for example. And actually, yeah, I guess if you give power to a government and it becomes a numbers game, you are going to feel like a number. Obviously, too many loose opinions mean the greater the prospect of those opinions clashing. I think that's where we're at, Douglas, isn't it? That equals trouble. Absolutely right. Johnny has a very interesting insight here. I think that many people lost their way in the crisis, but it's not the first crisis that we're experiencing now, but it is for many young people. Yeah, it's hard to see that, isn't it? As in difficult to see young people facing this. And I had this thought the other day, I can't really think of anything as traumatic as this for society. I've seen a few things in my 50s. I've seen a few things, but we've lived in a long post-war period, haven't we, where we haven't really had anything quite like this. Many people no longer have a footing. They have built their lives around money, luxury, success, and are now really lost. I think that's pretty insightful, Johnny. Thank you for that. For religious people who rely on the sense of congregation to help them through difficult times, they must feel especially vulnerable, not having access to what comforts them and gives them peace. Yep, I'm sure that's true, Gary. Steve, again, interesting twist on what you're saying is occurring here in the US. So Steve joining us from the United States tonight. Trump was dismissing COVID early on as the virus was spreading here. Trump said it would magically disappear. I think, it's probably just a matter of timing in his mind. Opinion leaders outside of government were advising caution. Strange times are even stranger in the US. That's normally the way, I think, Steve. Isn't it interesting you should say that? And you've got your presidential debate tonight. I think I might stay up for that. However we try and find a workable way in these difficult times, there can never be a real substitute for a hug or a hand to hold. That's really nice, Gary. And I think... And Shelley still thinks her computer's going to blow up. responding to that. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your comments. Really do. And in case you've joined, sorry, Jacqueline, what was that?
The comments. I think it's so lovely that people share what they're thinking. Yeah, and yeah, there's nothing that replaces that physical contact and things with people. But again, that's you know, it's something that we can miss. But we can just look forward to when we can do that, or we can break all the rules and do it anyway.
Yes, bit of both. Remember where you heard it first. Well, yes, on that note, yes, Gary, says Xander. Hi, Xander. Fellowship is important amongst those who walk with God, but faith carries us. And though we may miss the fellowship, I don't think we feel vulnerable. That's really wonderful. Brilliant. Thank you, Xander, for that insight there. So, yes, I completely agree with you, Jeff. It's lovely to have people sharing freely, I think. I think people understand this to be an open-hearted, open-minded space. For those who, you know, don't like it, can't cope with it, fair enough, understand that too. But I think we've got a certain kind of context here in which we can speak freely and respectfully. In case you've joined fairly recently, we have Jacqueline here, Dona Jacqueline to us, who joined me last week talking about the supernatural, and we managed to have a really fascinating conversation about, you know, why humans are interested in the supernatural, which came around to her deep faith and you know, active faith in God and Jesus, and so we talked about that last week, and it was great because people, you know, like I said at the beginning, this is an uncomfortable subject for so many people, and we did it anyway, and people kind of, you know, we talk about all sorts of things on Good Morning Portugal and Good Evening Portugal, and it was lovely to have the opportunity to speak of God, Jesus, religion, spirituality, and have people, I don't know, it felt to me a bit like sort of coming out of the closet in some ways. But there we go. So when we were talking before, Jacqueline, you suggested you might go into a bit more of the practical detail of how we might manage our minds, which could be a pretty awesome tactic to have in a time when so many people feel anxious, uncertain, bewildered, overwhelmed.
Yeah, just before we do that, can I just say that actually one of the really strange things that happen, which I'd just like to point out to these people who possibly object to talking about God and Jesus and so on and so forth. When people swear or get upset, they always say, "Oh, Jesus Christ," or "Oh, God," or something like that. Nobody ever says, "Oh, Buddha." Or,
are you suggesting we start?
Actually, people do talk about him quite a lot. And I've listened to some TV shows where Christ happens to be spoken of in that rather derogatory way, but it's almost every other word.
Indeed.
So that you know, there's got to be some explanation for that, which I haven't really found yet. But
well, you know, that might be my department, because I'm absolutely fascinated by that, and I think the reason why, you know, people who've grown up in Europe or America have grown up in a Judeo-Christian set of symbols and a framework, haven't they? And rebelling against it is part of that, possibly. But you can't. It's so powerful. You can't really just sort of get rid of it by not liking it. I think at some point you have to kind of come to terms with it. And that's not, I'm not saying, you know, people should believe, or I'm not saying people should do anything, but what it could
say people should do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. But what could
say you should do something either? He leaves choice completely to us.
Well, I guess that's this free will thing, right? And it's just so fascinating that we observe, and this is what you're going to talk about, I think, is that we observe our own mind at work. And I think one of the, you know, this kind of visceral reflex sort of rejections of Christianity is a lot to do with that process you talked about before of, you know, we have a thought, and then we have an emotion, and then we have a behavior. And I think where, you know, and let's face it, you know, a lot of people have used religion in the way that people are using politics at the moment. They've used it for personal betterment, and they've taken advantage of other people. And
totally beat people up.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and in recognizing that, I think people then say, okay, well, I don't like that. And then so when they think about anything to do with religion, they have the emotional reaction of like, you know, I don't like it. And then they have a reaction, you know, like Ty did earlier on. It's like, okay, they're talking about God, I'm going. And that to me is like, you know, I totally respect and understand that. But I also think, you know, well, hold on a minute, you know, we're just talking here. We're just talking. We're opening something up here that is subject to a very quick shutdown, or people would rather not talk about it at all. And, you know, the spirit for me of this, you know, pardon the pun, the spirit for me of this conversation is that we are open-minded and open-hearted. And, you know, my best friend atheists are like that. You know, they can keep talking. We can converse and be interested in each other's ideas, and there might be some sort of progress or enjoyment or something from the conversation. That's, for me, that's the basis of what we're doing here. And I think that's why people also don't say, "Oh, Buddha," it's because, you know, the Buddhistic, all the Buddhists I know are quite sort of intellectual people, and also quite rebellious people. So they've kind of really disliked the culture they've grown up in, and they've liked the glamour of the Eastern religions. So, or it's, you know, it's not even a religion, is it? It's a sort of set of principles. So it's easier to embrace that over there than it is to come to terms with what you've grown up with, I think, is part of that conversation. But it is interesting. You should say that, like, "Oh, Buddha," or whatever, you know. And then it's like, in the best of times and worst of times, people do cry to God, don't they? You know, this is, so when you're ecstatic with joy and bliss, you might, you know, shout, "Thank God," as well as in the worst of times, who are you going to call? Not Ghostbusters generally, but, you know, whatever it is, Providence, the universe, the great intelligence, whatever name you give it, you call to that thing.
And going back again, just before we go through the practical steps, which you asked me to do, which I won't forget, but going back to the government again, I mean, the government is actually voted in, well, in democracies, you know, to carry out the people's wishes. And the problem is that we seem to have lost that a bit, lost sight of what the government's there for. So the government is actually, you know, in America, the Constitution talks about for the people, by the people. So, you know, and if we've given up our control in that area as well. So we just sit down and, you know, take whatever they dish out. That's not necessarily the right thing to do either. But I don't want to stir people up into rebelling against the government. That's not what I'm talking about. But I do think we need to think about what we're being told. And some of the things we're being told to do are downright stupid. I mean, I can't think of any other word for it, really.
Yeah, and many people agree with you, and this is what I think Douglas was talking about before, is the opinions are so polarized and various that's a recipe for unrest, isn't it, individually and collectively. I don't know if we mentioned this before. My mum is 83 years young and breaking most rules with little help from her daughter. Very good. Andrew Scarborough, the lack of solidarity to remain resilient and responsible has been disappointing for Andrew. The push for an air bridge or clinging to aspects to keep business as usual doesn't deal with the issue. I guess it depends which issue. My country mobilized remote work. The commercial chains moved quickly and adapted to delivery models. Opportunities have grown out of the extreme change. Absolutely, Andrew. We are seeing that for sure, aren't we? And some things I think won't shrink back to their original shape after this. Johnny, why on all points does Trump have to intervene? First, let us come to peace with ourselves and our environment. Now that's revolutionary talk. Eugene's insight, everybody. Sweet Moko, the Samoan bird king. I don't know what he means. Maybe that's who Eugene calls to in times of elation and depression. Has Jacqueline noticed that most ghosts ate from Dickensian times? Never hear of caveman ghosts. Random. Gary, if we look at history, spirituality plays an important part of life and death. From the Aboriginal people of Australia to the Native American Indians, they all have an important spiritual link that has little to do with religion. Absolutely right. And also, we may come to this tonight, of course, and I've heard, you know, some older folks talking. I was listening to talk radio this morning, And this is telling us a lot about our relationship to death, isn't it? The pandemic. It's like, you know, no one should die, and no one ever dies. It would almost be the conclusion you could come to with how people are responding to this. And I think you make a great point there, Gary. Johnny, just finally, you can allow God into your life. That is a free choice. He does not demand anything from you. I think it is an open, friendly debate. Thank you, Johnny. And Bob Marley had it right. Love is my religion. Yeah, fair play, Charles. So
yeah, it's also God's religion, love.
Indeed, indeed. I think Bob Marley had a pretty. There's we've got two Marleys. We've got Jacob Marley, haven't we, and Bob Marley in tonight. I think you're going to tell us more about possibly the practical steps we could take. And you're also nodding your head, I think, they're in agreement about, you know, how this has brought up how we feel about death. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
Well, I mean, death happens to all of us. We sort of get born and we're moving towards death steadily all the time. So, and yet we do fight it. So that's another thing which I think is actually unnatural for us, really, but happens to everybody. And there's reasons, explanations for that God gives us in his word as to why and how, and also how we can have eternal life. I mean, not in this world at the moment, but we will bodily die, but spiritually and emotionally carry on. And but you know, people are afraid of death, and for lots of different reasons, and yet you would think we'd have got used to it because it's sort of happening all the time. I don't know figures of the number of people that die every day.
Well, actually, that website that we looked at before, Worldometers, does record that. I
don't mean of the COVID, I mean of just generally dying.
Yes, there have been nearly 44 million deaths this year in total in the world population,
right.
Which definitely is a sobering perspective, I think, and 152. I mean, this is seeming pretty maudlin, and I think it does seem like that because we're just not used to talking about it. But 152,500 people died today alone. You know, just generally is the estimation from Worldometers there, and we on the one hand, it's horrible. You know, we don't want to die. We don't want other people to die. And like you say, it's like it's been going on long enough for human beings that we know this, and we just haven't. We don't seem to have made very good terms with it, do we? We're just kind of neurotic about it. And I think that's all part of how the pandemic response has been informed as well because of that. And it's very different for the Aboriginal people and the Native American people, as Gary points out, I think.
Well,
sorry, Doug.
To God's people. Hey, we better cheer you up then, Doug.
Yeah, let's switch it up a bit.
Yeah. I can give you an example, for instance, of changing what you think, which actually happened to me this morning. I mean, it's happening all the time because our mind is active all the time. And this is why we also need to be really careful what we put into it, you know, what we receive into our eyes and ears and get control of our mind. But this morning I've got a little hand mirror and I was busy trying to have a look and do something to my face, which wasn't working. And I dropped this mirror on the floor and it broke in pieces. And I thought this was absolutely amazing because my very first thought, and I don't remember having heard this statement since I was probably a child, was 7 years bad luck. Have you heard that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Statement? Now, okay, so I can accept that and come into agreement with it, or I can deny it. And I actually said out loud, I'm not going to have 7 years bad luck. I am going to live long, have an amazing life, that God is going to show me all sorts of exciting things, and it's just going to get better and better. And yes, I'll die one day, but I've been on a journey. And for me, that's just stepping over into a new adventure with him, which I could go into a lot. But that is an example of what we have to do all the time, because we come into agreement with things that actually, and you can prove this, they actually weaken you. They weaken your body. I used to do something called applied kinesiology, which is a form of muscle testing. And I don't know if you know about it, but you can test words as well as to whether they strengthen you or weaken you. And so if you come into agreement with a thought like that, and you may even say it out loud, it's like a magnet to that happening to you. And that's just one example, but you can do it all the time. And you see, that's what we're having to do all the time with COVID. And so for me, the actual start of the process, when I feel fear coming in or something like that, is to start to, or I feel lack. Let's go for lack. Okay, so because the COVID is very much what people are missing, you know, what they can't do.
Yeah.
I always start off by being grateful for what I have and what I can do. And I learned a lot from a paraplegic who I looked after, who became a paraplegic after he'd had a car accident. I used to work with him, and he used to just be grateful that he could move a toe, one toe. And he gradually got quite a lot of movement. He didn't get fully recovered. I also believe that he could have got fully recovered. I believe I can get fully recovered. But it's that's a good place to start, is with gratitude. And you know, that we're all right in this minute, in this actual minute. I'm okay, I've got a roof over my head, I'm okay, I've got a wife or a husband or children, I can speak, I can sing, I can even dance, or whatever you can do. You can just enjoy what you can do, and you can, in my case, thank God that the sun comes up in the morning, even if it's raining, it's up somewhere or other, it's light, it's not pitchy dark anymore. And there's always something that we can be grateful for. So that actually starts to condition our mind into a place where we can let go of fear. For me, I do it through God's word, but through other people, they may do it through other ways. But the Bible's actually full of promises and that God gives, you know, to his people, and that we can appropriate. So even a lot of people who profess to be Christians really don't know what they've got and how to access it.
Interesting. Yes.
You know, that's, and by the way, I'm not religious, I'm relationship orientated.
Okay.
Which I believe there's a big difference.
Do you want to say more about that?
About the mind, or the...
No, about the distinction you made, yeah, about how you're more relationship focused than religion focused. You said you weren't religious.
Well, I'm not. I don't think religious ritual or following a set of rules actually gets you anywhere. It's a relationship. Jesus came to restore the relationship that had been lost with people, between God and people. And I mean, God does look after us, whether we belong to him or not. But there is a way of becoming part of his family through Jesus Christ made that way. That's what it tells us. And it's a bit like a human family, you know. You love people. You probably love lots of children, but you have a special relationship with your own children. And so when we become God's children, through the process of what's been called being born again, which, if I really start going into that, we'd probably lose it.
Yes, give it a couple of weeks. Give it a couple of weeks.
But, you know, I can explain that really well. And but the thing is that we're talking about everybody being able to do something.
Yeah,
so we're talking about your mind, and then when your mind is calmer, then your creativity can come into being. I mean, you can't really create anything if you're in a sort of blue funk or a panic. You can just
call it a blue funk.
It's sort of, you know, people can break down completely mentally and be unable to function normally.
Yeah.
But if you can change that, then you can start to be creative, and you can then think, well, what can I do in this situation, even though it might be ghastly? What is it I can do to improve my quality of life and the quality of life of those people around me? Yeah. So you start then being not only affecting your own life, but you sort of can create a space around you that affects everybody else. Because just like fear's catching, so is peace and calm. One of the things that happens to people when they come to my house is they say, well, some of them just come up because they want to sleep. I used to have a friend who used to say, I need to sleep, can I come and stay with you for a few days? And she would sort of sleep for sort of 3 days and 3 nights and get up and go home. And, you know, that was fine with me.
That's an easy guess, isn't it?
But a lot of people do huge peace just being here and being I'm not always unworried, you know, but I practice being, so I work at it.
Yes, so I'm sure you have to. I'm sure you have to. And yeah, like the practice makes perfect. We have some lovely comments. We really do, because there's something about talking to you, I think, and how people respond to you, and it's a really lovely mixture, actually, of sort of irreverence and fun, and dealing with some really profound things here. So we saw before, didn't we, that Douglas was depressed, and then we turned that around. I think he said, "I know what death feels like. It feels like it felt before I was born," which I think is like a humorous insight, but it's absolutely true, isn't it? Because I remember someone saying, "You like, can you remember being dead?" It's like, no. Well, then you obviously haven't been dead, and then a smart Alec would say, "Okay, well then I can remember being dead." Well, then if you can remember being dead, you can't have been dead. It's like there's something about our awareness, isn't there, that doesn't die. Yeah. We can think that physical bodies definitely do, and that, you know, in the times in which we live, we very rarely see a dead body now, a physical body that's passed on, and that, you know, that's quite an unusual thing for people. Oh, all the best things I'll say are when I'm frozen, but I was just saying we don't see dead bodies anymore, do we? It's an odd. That's part of our neurosis, I think, at the moment. I really like that, Douglas. Ultimately, no one gets out alive, but nature wastes nothing and the spirit endures, I think. Whichever way you choose to make sense of that is your choice. Absolutely, Gary. That is our free will in action, isn't it? In all cultures and religions, death is not the end. So why fear? I get it, Johnny, on a sort of intellectual basis. And I think it takes a brave person to say they're not afraid of dying, because it's still even however much faith you've got. I think that's a big day if that news is broken to you, or you realise you're in that impending, you know, inevitable situation. True, you weren't scared of being born. We know nothing about either, do we? Really, and it's remarkable, isn't it? Here we all are, us human beings, going about our stuff, and it's so true, Gary. We don't know anything about either of those situations, do we? It's like something happens to us, a kind of anesthetic or something to save us from that. I don't know the details of those processes. Charles, coming from a nice sort of energy point of view here, matter cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes its form and becomes something else. That would appear to be the case, wouldn't it? And my teenage son can move a toe, but not until 10 o'clock in the morning, usually. Not scared of dying. Just what I don't want it just yet, though. But when the time comes, it's going to be like, okay, here's the answer to the big question. It's like that roller coaster ride meme, isn't it? You know, that I think, you know, obviously there is no comparison between a roller coaster ride and anything we could possibly imagine about death. But I do like the spirit and courageousness and heart of what you're saying there, Gary. And I would like to think I'd be in a similar condition. Turn to drink, Doug. He's already said that. He's already dealt with the drink's gone to my head, and his father told him it would be lonely. Gary, the answer is 42, obviously. Thank you for sharing that. We always need that reminder, don't we? The answer is 42. Vinny, lovely to see you here. And let me introduce you, my two friends, Jacqueline and Vincent. Vinny, when I separated the religious vehicle and institution of religion from my personal experience of God and Jesus, I was able to step into God's purity. In my opinion, the institution of religion is left brain and obscured my vision of the simplicity of connecting to God inwardly. I now understand more deeply that God is patiently waiting for us all to hook up inside, to really feel trust and let go and connect up. Oh, I'm feeling that warming cockles of my heart, Vinny. Absolutely. Jacqueline.
Yeah, that was absolutely lovely. And that's true. He's just waiting for us. He wants us all, but he won't force us, you see. And I love this, this thing about matter. If God's created life, which he has, no one else has been able to do that. You know, we can clone things, we can mess about with things, but we've not been able to create anything living. Therefore it does keep going. It's actually, and I definitely believe this life is a journey, you know, and it's actually quite a short journey compared to eternity. And, but it does have a destination, and that's the thing that we should be aware of. Because, you know, our soul and our spirit lives on.
Well, perhaps,
you know, according to the Bible, we will end up back on the earth, a completely new earth, which will be wonderful. You know, I went to Papua New Guinea one year.
I didn't know that.
Well, I did, and I had family out there, and I went to stay there. And there are parts of Papua New Guinea which are almost inaccessible. But because there have been very few people there, if you do get into the forests and things, the birds are all around. They're not afraid of us.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, there's all sorts of, when I went there, it was only, I think it was only 60 years after they believed that cannibalism had died out. So, you know, they either accept you in the tribes. There are millions of tribes scattered around and very much separated. But the country was absolutely fascinating because, you know, you could go and you could see parakeets and all these wonderful, wonderful coloured birds, and they would just sit on the branch and sing away to you, and you could get right up close. And we've caused them to fear, and they run away. So I had a little glimpse of what sort of untouched nature looked like, if there's anything else left on the planet that we haven't managed to destroy.
True.
So yeah. That's a promise to look forward to, because I always used to, as a little girl, think, you know, going to heaven was going to be really boring. you know, I thought about, you mentioned, that it was really hard to get there because I've been told something about ladders going up and down.
Oh,
So
really? Right.
I thought I had to climb a ladder. And then when I got there, I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to be doing because this is just too boring for anything.
Playing your harp all day.
Sitting on the cloud.
Yeah, that does sound a bit boring, actually.
So,
well, we've approaching the end. Well, we've gone past the end of our hour, but we don't need to rush off.
We haven't even got round to health and.
Well, that means you've got to come back next week, because I'm looking for a way to bring you back, and that's as good a reason as any. If you will accept my invitation to come back, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of others here. Will you come back and we'll continue this conversation?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'd love to.
Fantastic.
I'm really enjoying talking to you, and you know, it's just really nice that some people are open to hearing, and
Yeah.
you know, I say what I do because I really do love people. I really love people, and I'm so sad at the condition that we're all in.
Yeah.
And you know, it just seems so wrong. And you know, I would like to also, you know, talk about the things that we can question and maybe are at some time going to have to stand up to and say, no, I'm not doing that.
Well, that sounds pretty Christ-like in the way that we understand the historical man, Jesus Christ. So yeah, absolutely, we should talk about that, I think. And it's all about context, isn't it? And creating a space in which we can do that. And I think it's brilliant. I thank everyone for taking some sort of responsibility for that tonight. And all the wonderful comments like this one. One thing you'll never hear me say, "Oh no, I'm dead." From Doug. He's great value, isn't he? Cannibalism, Colonel Cadaver, Kentucky Fried Neighbours, which you can join in Papua New Guinea if you'd got there a century before. I'm not a greedy man, but if God could reveal the next 5 balls and the bonus ball, I'd be very appreciative. Fantastic. One of the hardest things is to tell someone you love that it's okay to leave this life behind. Yeah, I did this with my dad. Me too, Gary. And a few days later, he died. He was a brave and courageous man, but he's still around, and I know it. Same here, mate. Absolutely right. When I see a feather, I'm reminded, because my dad's around all the time, but I'm reminded from time to time in symbols, and that's how we work, isn't it? Like the ladders and the harps and the clouds and things like that. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, Gary. And Gary's dad has been promised a beer in the Gaz Bar, which is made famous by Gary in Al Fayazara there. Let's just go back to Johnny's comment there. Dona Jacqueline brings a certain kind of peace that many people need. Yes, absolutely. So she'll be back again. We'll probably have to change this, won't we, from News Hour, Expat News Hour, to sort of Dona Jacqueline's Hour. You know, this is like, I don't know. I was thinking, like, you know, there's this concept of the agony aunt, isn't there? But it's almost like you could be the ecstasy grandma, but that conjures up an entirely different. The ecstasy grandma could get you into all sorts of trouble. So
yeah,
we won't.
I just want to answer one of those comments about the
go on.
the balls or the
the lottery. Here we go. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Eugene wants a lottery numbers.
I don't actually do the lottery, but I've got nothing against it. I just don't do it. But I mean, one of God's promises is that He will show you how to prosper and prosper the work of your hands. And I just like to end on that because that is one of the areas we need to learn, you know, is how to prosper in these times. And Solomon, one of the kings in the Bible, that was David's son, he was the richest man on earth and still would be, I think if he lived in this time, still would be the richest. And it was because of it that the wisdom, that he asked for wisdom and God gave him wisdom, but he also learned how to do things. And then used what he learned wisely. And he came, you know, that's how he got his riches. So God doesn't want us to be poor. He wants us to prosper.
And the lottery is not the only way.
So the lottery isn't the only way, but he will show you. You know, if you ask him, he'll show you.
Yeah. Ecstasy Grandma Albufera on a Saturday. Yeah, we're not gonna go with that. It's not one of my better ideas. But sorry for the late arrival. Mrs. Leyland said I have to take you up to bed to listen to you there. Okay, Jeff, we're so delighted to be with you. It was like a Morecambe and Wise sketch. All the three of us sat in bed together. But night from Doug, thank you so much for all your contributions. Vinny's, I think the sentiment here is that his mum is around him all the time, the same way that me and Gary were talking about with our fathers. And Vinny also says, love the show, guys. Really enjoyed it. So, Jacqueline, I don't know if you want to. You said that was going to be your final contribution, but I think it's like, you know, you should have the last word on the show if you want to. Over to you if you want to give something that will see us through to next Tuesday.
I could share a miracle story that I heard this week.
Please.
And that was a lady I was talking to, and she was in a very stressful situation, and she was really asking for help. And I said, well, I don't really know how to help you, but I do know somebody that can. And I actually talked about Jesus a little bit to her. And she said she didn't know whether she could believe or she couldn't believe. So I said, well, why don't you just take yourself off somewhere quiet and speak to him? And I just asked him to reveal himself to you and to show you something. And she sent me a photograph and a little story on WhatsApp. And she'd gone to the beach and she was sitting by the water with her feet almost touching the water, so the waves were lapping. And it was at 7 o'clock in the morning, apparently. And she did just that. And actually, she sort of adapted it a bit. She said, my friend says, if I ask you, you will show yourself to me. And she wears a necklace with a little black stone around it with a heart shape. And as she said, she added something to it. She said, I want to know if you love me. And as she'd almost just finished saying it, the waves washed up this black stone, which was an absolute replica of the one that she had round her neck. I mean, I can go quite sort of goosey bumpy just even thinking about it. And she started to sing a song. And she just started to sing this song, Yes, Jesus Loves Me, which I've heard lots of children in Sunday school sing. But she said she didn't know it, but she sang it to me. And she must have heard it somewhere in, her youth probably. But I thought it was such a lovely story. But she said she just felt at that moment everything that she was worried about sort of left her. And this peace came over her. And so that's what I would like to pray, if you like, over all our listeners, is that they find the peace of God and the hope that God gives. And they're able to renew their minds with what he thinks and what he wants and what they are working towards. So that's what I'd like to leave on.
That's beautiful. So let's leave it there. Thank you so much. And we'll see you again next Tuesday.
I've kept you over time.
It's not a problem. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who has contributed tonight. We'll see you again. Yeah, if you don't watch the Good Morning Portugal live stream or any of the other stuff, make sure you're here next Tuesday, because we'll have a bit more fun and a bit more profundity and love and peace and stillness with Dona Jacqueline. Thank you so much.
Okay. We'll move on to health maybe next week. Huh?
Yes, indeed. We'll come back to health. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for all the lovely comments. And thank you even to the people that had to run away because they'll be back.